In this video, I'm going to answer questions 16, I'm sorry, chapter 16, number 18, number 20, and then I think I'm going to answer number 21 in the same video. I'm going to do this because I made a mistake even assigning number 18, really. I don't find this question as useful as I thought I did. Because at a glance, the figure that they're referring to I thought was the money market. I didn't read the axes very carefully. And actually, that figure is about the bond market. And I don't think many authors of 101, 102 level textbooks think that analyzing the price of bonds is a useful practice. At this level, I was looking for the effect on interest rates, which is tucked in this question, but it's not really what the question is about. So I'm going to skip it, or I'm not going to skip it, I'm going to cover it very quickly, and then move on to 20 and 21, because they are more about that. Let's see how this works out for me. Number 18, consider the two panels of figure 16-2. Suppose that instructions in the latest FOMC directive, Federal Open Market Committee directive, call for a monetary policy aimed at pushing down the rate of interest prevailing in the economy. Use the appropriate panel of the figure to assist in explaining whether the officials at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York's bond trading desk should buy or sell existing bonds. Well, the main thing that I was looking for in this question is that they want to push down the rate of interest. If you want to push down the rate of interest, do you want money to be cheaper or more expensive? The rate of interest is the price on money, so you're saying you want money to be cheaper. If you want something to be cheaper, all else held constant, do you make it more scarce or more abundant? You make it more abundant. So the Fed would increase the money supply. And since they're buying and selling bonds, how do they increase the supply of money? In that case, they would buy bonds. They're laying money on the bond trading desk and taking bonds out and locking them away. So that's increasing the money supply. That increases interest rates. Just so you know, what that does is, since they're purchasing bonds, they're taking bonds away, and that will push up on the price of bonds. But the price of bonds isn't the interest rate of bonds. It's the price at which they trade. So I don't find that particularly useful, but that is what the answer to the question would be if you worked hard on it. That's what you hopefully got to. I wouldn't worry about ever seeing this question from me again, because it was an accident that I asked it. I didn't realize that they were concerned with the price of bonds. Sorry. Number 20. Let's see if I can reel this in and get to what is important. Take a look at figure 16-3. Discuss a policy action that the trading desk at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York could undertake in order to bring about the increase in aggregate demand displayed in this figure. So this is an aggregate demand, aggregate supply framework. So if the Fed wants to increase aggregate demand at figure 16.3, figure 16.3 is a picture of a recessionary gap. So let me just repeat that here on my whiteboard. Recessionary gap looks like this. Or one way that I could ask this is, if I can get my handwriting to work for me. Struggling with my handwriting. What's wrong with this picture? Well, I've already said it's a recessionary gap. And how do I know that? Because the intersection of short-run aggregate supply and aggregate demand are left of the potential output of the economy. So this is a recessionary gap, and what's happening is our GDP is down from what it could be, given the potential of the economy, illustrated by long-run aggregate supply. And we do have downward pressure on the price level, because what we're looking at is that aggregate demand has fallen down. Aggregate demand was here, and it's fallen down. So we have downward pressure on the price level, And we have this down here is the recessionary gap. We're interested in a Fed policy to address that. Well, they want to increase aggregate demand. Aggregate demand determinants are C, I, G, and NX, consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. How do they increase any of those things? Well, they can increase investment and they can increase consumption by lowering interest rates. That would increase demand, aggregate demand, like this, by increasing consumption and investment, by lowering interest rates. How do they lower interest rates? Well, let's look at the money market for that. There's the money market. It looks like the bond market, but it's the money market. And the bond market was in that previous question. The Fed can't affect money demand, but the Fed can certainly affect the supply of money. That's M sub S or MS for money supply up there. And what they want to do is lower interest rates. So what they can do is increase the supply of money. And that pushes down on the interest rate. And to increase the supply of money using open market operations, that means what they're doing is they're taking money out of the vault and they're putting it on the bond trading desk, buying bonds. So they buy bonds. That leads to that occurrence. This lowering of interest rates increases consumption and investments and leads to this occurrence. So that's what we're talking about and expecting in number 16-20. 21 reads like this. Consider the figure 16-3, same figure, the aggregate supply or demand framework. Discuss the policy of the bond trading desk of the Bank of New York to undertake in order to generate a decrease in aggregate demand displayed in this figure. So here, if the problem was the reverse, if aggregate demand had been up too high, but let me just go ahead and draw it. It'll only take me a second. This is actually just like the first questions that we did. We have aggregate demand up too high, and we have an inflationary gap. So this question is a repeat of the first two questions. What can the Fed do about an inflationary gap? In this one, I'll go ahead and add to our drawing another model, the model for the money market, so we can sort of show the mechanics of how it works. Here's that money market, and the Fed can influence interest rates by changing the money supply through their open market operations, buying and selling bonds. We have an inflationary gap over here in aggregate supply and aggregate demand. We know that because we're, in the short run, producing above our capacity. It means people are working overtime. People who normally wouldn't be working are working. Prices are getting pushed up. This is what the Fed is concerned with, is this upward pressure on prices. That could be inflationary, so they don't want that. It's part of their mandate. My marker is not cooperating. There we go. So what they want to do is you decrease consumption or investment, cool the economy down. And so over here, what can they do? They want interest rates to be higher in order for this to go up, they don't affect this. They do affect that. So for interest rates to go up, what must they do? Decrease the money supply. And that pushes up on interest rates. Higher interest rates decrease consumption or investment and pushes aggregate demand down and offsets that and cools off the economy, gets us back to our full employment level of output. Specifically, how do they decrease the money supply in terms of buying or selling bonds, open market operations? Well, if they want to take money out of the economy, then they sell bonds, because that means they're going to put bonds at the bond trading desk and say, give me the money. They're going to take it out of the banking system and lock it up in their vault. That decreases the money supply. That does that. So they do this by selling bonds. Selling bonds for money takes money out of banking. And it pushes up on the interest rate, and that's what we can expect to follow. So that is 18, which I regret, and 20 and 21, which I don't regret.